This is Swarfcast. I'm Noah Graff. I am very honored to be with Richard Kingsbury, Managing Director of the Kingsbury Engineering Division, a subsidiary of the George Kingsbury Holdings Limited. Welcome to the show,
Noah,
Richard.
many thanks for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
I've been looking forward to doing this interview for a while. Richard sells index machine tools, and we've done a deal or two.
Yes, yeah.
I know a lot of people in the world who buy and sell indexes, some in the new business, some in the used business, and Richard he's one of the best. So
I'm not sure that's true, but I'll take it.
All right. I want just a brief summary of your company, what you do, and then I want to get a little into your story.
All right. Well, the company was founded by my grandfather in 1956. He was the original George Kingsbury, and I actually did quite an interesting video on YouTube called Kingsbury Origins, which described how the company started. And I won't go into a lot of detail here, but if anybody's interested, they can find it on YouTube. But it did start from reparations at the end of the Second World War. Germany having lost, the Allies met in Potsdam. So Churchill, Truman, and Stalin met to try and divide up who got what out of the war. And of course, Germany was basically skint, bust, no money at the end of the war. So these reparations were paid in intellectual property, capital equipment, and in land. And one of the companies that was affected by that was Index. So in 1945, at the Potsdam Agreement, it was decided that Index, their products and their designs would be sold by a British company called BSA Tools, and that they would have the rights to sell these machines for 10 years. At the time, my grandfather had a subcontract shop, and he used Index machines. So
back in the day, these indexes, were these purely multi-spindles?
No, these were single spindle cam autos.
Okay, but these were turning machines. This was before Index was doing milling or any of that stuff.
Yeah, this was simple cam auto turning.
Screw machines.
Screw machines, single spindle.
Okay, just making sure I understand the history right. Index it's what, 100 years old?
Yes, it was founded in 1914, so it's 110 now.
Okay, all right. I'll stop interrupting you. Go on.
That's no problem at all. So effectively, BSA could build and sell these machines under license. So my grandfather, a subcontractor at the time, used both machines. He used the BSA and he had some original indexes. And he quickly came to the realization that the Index product was a much higher standard. And he decided that he would rather sell Index machines than use them. And he learned that this reparations agreement would only last for 10 years, from 1945 to 1955. So effectively, he decided to set about a sort of process to try and win over the Index senior management, which included sending his son, my father, to Germany for 9 months to work at Index to sort of impress upon the senior management that George was keen. And eventually the sales director from Index was sent over. George showed off his facility, tried to impress this guy that he was the right man for the job. And they repaired to lunch, which is often the way business was done back in the 50s. And over the pudding or the cheese course or whatever it was, George said to the sales director of Index, if you give me the unique or exclusive distributorship of your products in the UK and Ireland, I will write you a purchase order now for 30 Index cam autos on the basis that you give me 120 days to pay for them. Well, there isn't a sales director in the world faced with a proposition like that wouldn't say yes.
Sure.
So the purchase order was struck. The deal was made. We became Index's exclusive distributor in the UK. And George went back to the office to tell his two sons he'd just bought 30 cam autos and they had 120 days to sell them. And that's how we started the business.
And you've kept this ballsiness going since then. Is there a British word for that? We say chutzpah in Yiddish.
Chutzpah's a good name. Chutzpah's a great word. We don't use chutzpah so much, but I'm familiar with it. But yeah, I think my grandfather was a huge influence on me. He was a very entrepreneurial guy, a great bon vivant. He enjoyed life. He worked hard. He played hard. and I got a lot of inspiration from him. And I like to think we try and continue in that vein. So we're always thinking about different ways of doing things, different approaches. And it makes life exciting.
Cool. All right. And you've already sort of answered part of my question. So your father, he got in the business, and then...
Yeah, so my father and uncle. So my grandfather had two sons, Mike, who unfortunately passed away last year, my father, and his brother, his younger brother, Chris, who is still the chairman of our board, 84 years old, and is still very much involved with the business, sits at the top of the holding company, and makes sure we keep it all on the straight and narrow.
Yeah, and so the holding company, you guys do more than just machine tools. I had no idea about this.
Yeah, so we diversified in the early 90s.
But it was originally selling indexes. That was what Kingsbury was.
That's how we started. So we're now the second oldest index dealer in the world. Only Japan is older. So the Japanese signed with Index in 1918. So they've been going for 106 years.
They sell indexes in Japan?
Sure they do. And we started with Index in 56, so we're now the second oldest at just coming up to 70 years.
Wow.
But yeah, so we started as an engineering company selling Index, and that division has grown. And in the 90s, we decided to diversify out of engineering simply because you will know, Noah, that payment terms on large bits of capital equipment can be lumpy. People will give you a small deposit. They'll want the balance when you deliver it. Sometimes these machines are built over many months. So we wanted a business that was cash generative, something that was generating invoices every day. And so we purchased a timber business in the early 90s, and we also developed some property. And that is a separate division. We now have about 20 retail outlets in the southeast of England selling timber, you would call it lumber, to members of the public, to the building trade, for building houses or putting up decking or putting shelves up in your garage, whatever you want.
How does that business compare to selling indexes?
Well, to be honest, I don't have anything to do with the timber business. I wouldn't know
Sure.
if it is 4x2 if it...
You wouldn't know like how good a business that is compared to selling one. Which one is, do you know if which one is
No,
more?
I'm
sure they have their own challenges.
Yeah, it's a very good business. The nice thing about it is that they have different peaks and troughs. So when,
Yes.
we have different economic cycles. So, for example, during the COVID times when people were furloughed and mostly at home, very often on a significant percentage of their pay packet, they all spent a lot of time doing up their houses. So the timber business actually did very well in COVID. But of course, the engineering business, machine tools, was a very tough place to be. Okay.
And then when you were a kid, did it always seem like something you wanted to do?
No, far from it. So typical 18-year-old leaving school, didn't have a clue what I wanted to do. I think mum and dad were frustrated with me hanging about the house and said, for God's sake, go and do something. So I started an apprenticeship with a UK customer of ours. Now, the son is second generation and is a great friend of mine. But I wasn't overly enamored with my apprenticeship when I was working at their factory. I won't mention the names, but anyway, it wasn't the greatest experience.
Okay, so you were working as an apprentice in a shop.
In a shop. And then that changed, and I got the opportunity of working as an apprentice at Index in Germany. So I went to Germany when I was 19, and I worked for Index in Germany and then in the US for about 5 years.
You didn't go to school for engineering?
I didn't go to university. I was too thick.
Interesting. So I just, you're talking about the diversified business in England. Is England a good place for manufacturing? I mean, you hear a lot about Margaret Thatcher in the 80s and, sending a lot of manufacturing away, and you hear about, it's a services economy. And I mean, look, as you probably know, Graf Pinkert, we've been selling machines for 80 years, and a lot of our heyday was selling Wickmans. So we obviously know there's a great history of screw machining and machine tools in England. But, you hear in the 80s and 90s, a lot went away. Even though a lot goes away, there's still a lot there. But what's your opinion of that?
Yeah.
Was business better back then? Was it easier? Was it?
Well, I'm not that old now. I can't remember back to the 50s and 60s.
No, but you remember the 80s and 90s, probably.
Yes, I do remember the 80s and 90s well. Let me explain it this way. The British machine tool industry is basically dead. There are no indigenous manufacturers of machine tools, with one or two exceptions. We used to have a very vibrant machine tool industry back in the 50s and the 60s. It was underinvested. We had union issues. Things went from bad to worse. So we were very early, obviously, on the Industrial Revolution front, and we never really invested out of that cycle. So we probably got a bit lazy with what was achieved. The Second World War pretty much killed us, and nobody really invested after that. And what's left now is some very high-end engineering. So we have a very, very vibrant subcontract center with a sector with some very, very good people. We obviously have a massive infrastructure on the aerospace side. So I think we are the second biggest aerospace manufacturer in the world after the US, which is a statistic not many people know. So our aerospace sector is
Rolls-Royce.
Well, Rolls-Royce, but we also have Airbus here. Boeing have now got their first overseas factory in the UK. We have GKN here. We have Spirit. We have Gardner Aerospace. So we have some Magellan. We have some very big primes involved on the aerospace sector, which is strong for us. We obviously have the Formula One sector, which is a big driver for subcontract. It's hard to imagine that it should be such a big driver, but it certainly is. All of those teams spending quite a lot of money. So there's some very high-end engineering. And I think our medical sector, we have a lot of American companies that have transplanted into Ireland. So that, your big three medical manufacturers of hip joints and knees and femoral stems, these guys have all got large facilities in Ireland that are used to satisfy the European market. And of course, that's a market we're also involved with in Ireland.
Sure. Interesting. Is England a difficult? I mean, you think England is more difficult to start a business than in United States? I know this is not exactly like what you do on a regular basis, but I mean, you're very involved in business. So
I think England is,
in particular, I guess, because of our audience, a screw machine company,
Yeah, I mean, I worked in the States from 85 to 88, which is a long time ago. And I worked with big companies and small startups, but I've never actually started my own business in the States, so I don't know how easy it is to compare. It's not difficult to start a business in the UK. What I would say is we recently started a business in 2018. We started a business in the Middle East, in Dubai, and we now also sell index. And
Kingsbury does.
Kingsbury does, yeah. And we are now responsible for the Middle East markets. And that is a much more difficult place to open a business. Just setting up a bank account is a work of incredible patience.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you're selling indexes to people in Dubai?
Well, not just Dubai, the whole GCC. So that would be the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, and Oman.
I mean, I don't mean to offend anybody listening to this, but, when people contact us from those countries looking for used machines, we don't sell them to them. I mean, honestly, I don't think we're even able to sell machines to those countries because of homeland security. Yeah,
no, you're right. So that's exactly the same in the UK and in Germany. So in Germany, they have an office called BAFA. I can't tell you what BAFA stands for, the Bureau or something or other, but every export that we do, certainly of index machines or Hermle machines, so we also sell the Hermle 5-axis vertical machining centers, because these are deemed dual use, they could be used for anything, and their accuracy is at such a level, we cannot sell anything without an export license. So every person who places an order with us, we have to register their interest with the government, whether it be the UK government or the German government, and we have to wait for them to come back and say, yes, you can sell to them, or no, you can't. And if they say no, we don't sell. Obviously, you can't get an export license. So it is a much more torturous way of doing business. And of course, since Hamas rolled over the border into Israel on October the 7th, it's become even more difficult.
Yeah, because you wonder, you sell it to one person and you wonder where it's going later. And I don't want to get you in trouble with your customers, but I'm sure this is something you guys talk about every day.
Yeah, no, we can't sell it and not know where it's going. So the whole purpose of the export licenses that we have to get are very thorough. So, I can't mention names, but we had one company that on the outside looked to be a boat builder. And when we tried to sell the machine, we couldn't get export approval. And then it looked as though once we started doing some digging and investigating why couldn't we get export approval, that one of the directors had traveled to Russia in the last few years. And of course, if anybody's traveling to Russia, that is a red flag. You've got no chance. So we have to be
That's another thing. When people contact us from Ukraine, I'm afraid that it's going to go to Russia. I'm afraid they're impersonating.
You have to be very, very careful. This whole world is topsy-turvy at the moment. And certainly it's a risk that nobody would take. You'd be mad to take it. So unless you know exactly where it's going and you have the proper authorities' approval, and to be honest, you couldn't ship it without it anyway. They wouldn't get through the ports.
Yeah. All right. Well, this is a wonderful rabbit hole. But I want to let's talk indexes for a bit. A lot of people who listen to this, they may only run, CNC mills, or maybe they run cam screw machines. First, give us the 5-year-old definition of screw machining, multi-spindle screw machining, and then getting into a little CNC, and then I want your sales pitch. Why I should buy an index versus, honestly, I think I always say index because, I mean, there's some other great things than some of the other builders, but it's the, it's the Mercedes, it's the gold standard.
I think they have 90% of the world market on CNC multi-spindles. So it's, they are number one by an incredible margin, and there's a reason for it. So if I give you a quick synopsis for those who don't understand multi-spindles, and I know you're familiar with this, Noah, but if you take a Wickman machine, for example, so you have 6 spindles in a drum, and the drum has to rotate. So you've got 6 bars of material protruding from your 6 spindles, and you're rotating your drum within a housing. And because you're rotating the drum in a housing, as spindles rotate, they get hot, and the drum expands. So you have to have a loose fit between the drum itself and the housing that it's sitting in. And the way a Wickman index is you have a Geneva mechanism that rotates the drum by 60 degrees and then a shot bolt that comes in from the side to lock it in place. And the net effect of that, if I use a prop here, so if this is my spindle drum, when my shot bolt comes in to lock it into position, I push it off center. So on a Wickman machine, the only thing that you could ever make would be commercially turned parts. And because you had to compromise on your spindle speed, you had one spindle speed that you set with some gears, and then you either overtook or undertook, depending on what you wanted to do with your driven tools for your drilling. And you had form tools that came in from the side. So you produced long swarf, chips, as you would call them. And the reality was you could only use those machines on relatively commercial turn parts in relatively easy to chip material, because there's nothing worse than having stringy material on an index drum that's rotating. The whole thing gets bound up. So the Wickman had its niche. It was fantastic at producing commercial parts in high volume because the cycle times were unrivaled.
So tell people what kind of volumes you're talking about.
I mean, you're talking batch sizes of hundreds of thousands. So a Wickman could make a part in 4, 5, 6, 7 seconds, and it will run all year. But
the beautiful thing about a Wickman is you can have a Wickman from the 60s, and it can run as fast as a Wickman from the 90s.
Of course, because they haven't really changed that much. The downside of a Wickman is that the guy who had the ability to tweak and tap it and set it with his little copper hammer, who was happy to sit there in amongst all of that oil and mess in that dark satanic mill, those guys are as rare as rocking horse poo, as we would say over here.
Usually, yeah.
They're hard to find. And the skill set that person has is enormous. And the younger generation won't want to work on that type of machine. And because the changeover time from one part to another is so long, and effectively parts of batch size of that size aren't that common, the incidence of people buying a Wickman has diminished. Now, Index started.
Don't tell me that.
Well, it's a harsh reality. It's a harsh reality.
I know. Honestly, we've hardly sold any Wickmans in the last 2 years.
Yes.
We've sold more Davenports than Wickmans and Acmes than Wickmans. And I mean, they're the same animal.
I don't understand how you're selling cam-driven multi-spindles at all anymore, personally. But
we've sold that's been helping pay the bills, selling Davenports to Mexico or India, or because, as you're going to explain in a few minutes about the price point of an Index, that's going to tell you why somebody still might want to buy a cam multi-spindle versus a CNC.
Well, I personally don't. I can see why you might sell a cam-driven multi-spindle in Mexico or India, but I cannot see how you would sell one in a Western economy with Western pay grades, with Western social costs of employment. It's not possible. You need something that generates more money per hour. So let's just flip the coin quickly and explain.
Yeah. No, I mean, this is a whole nother debate. But go on. Now, tell us about a CNC multi-spindle. How does that work?
So the big difference between the CNC multi-spindle. So once again, you've got your 6 spindles in the drum. So it looks very similar to how a Wickman would look. And now Index have got different versions with 8 spindles, but let's not confuse the issue at the moment. But each individual spindle is connected to its own drive and its own motor. So effectively, every spindle can rotate at any speed in any direction. Now, the alert amongst you will realize if that's the situation, you have a wired connection between the spindle and the drive in the electrical cabinet. And if you keep rotating your drum in one direction, sooner or later, your wires will break. So Index patented the brilliantly simple idea that we will index the drum 5 incremental steps in one direction, and then to get the 6th index, we'll reverse the drum. So it winds up 300 degrees, and then it reverses 300 degrees. So
and the other Schutas, Tornos, they don't do that.
They couldn't do that for 25 years. Now they can. But what they did to try and compete was they would use slip ring technology. So they would have slip rings, and effectively they would come in and out of contact with the motor when they index the drum. The drawback of that, if you want to produce a thread in spindle position 2 and chamfer the thread in spindle position 3, you've got to re-reference your spindles. On Index, we don't have to. So we can cross-drill in spindle position 2, we can cross-thread that hole in spindle position 3, and we can chamfer using y-axis around the bore of that cross-thread in spindle position 4, and we can do it immediately, all simultaneously.
Sounds just like a more logical, simple process with less things that can go wrong.
Well, it's a very clever solution. And because you can now turn each individual spindle at the speed that you want to and use the tools that you want to, we're not limited to form tools now. We use regular inserts like you would use on a fixed head machine. We use the same cutting data that you would use. So we can run 300 meters a minute surface speed in mild turning steel, 0.3 feed rates. We can do all of those things that you can do on a conventional fixed head machine, but we do it within the body of a multi-spindle. So we have huge flexibility. Everything is programmed. No more copper hammer. It's all done on a program. The program is...
Unfortunately, we've dealt with you when you sell one of these machines to somebody who hasn't had one before. They get out the lead hammer, as we
yeah, which you just don't need. So we can offset tools to microns just by measuring the part and making the offset. So it's just a CNC machine, cleverly put together, but it means we have incredible output, but also great flexibility to change from one part to another. So we can set a multi. We did a seminar 2 years ago in our factory in Gosport where we invited a select audience. We built an auditorium in the factory, a bit like going into a lecture hall at university. So a tiered auditorium, and we had cameras inside the machine. And we took all the tools out of the machine. There wasn't a single tool in there. And I did a bit of a presentation and a spiel for 20 minutes while one of my colleagues started to populate the machine with tools in front of a live audience with cameras going so people could see inside the machine. Wow. And after 20 minutes, he hits the button and he makes the first part. We walk around the spindles and we make the first part. He measures a few things, makes a few offsets, and then he hits it into production. 22 minutes, we're running a part. That's unheard of on a Wickman. You can't do that on a Wickman. And the part that we were doing was this part. Now, it doesn't look like much there.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can see that, but what we've done is
we can see it great.
I've sectioned the part. So that's sectioned through, and you can see there's some pretty ornate bores in there, some pretty fine finishes. There's a very small diameter just through here, just here, that we are holding to 10 microns on a multi-spindle. Obviously, we've got a thread in there. So that's the section part. Now, that part was coming off in about 18 seconds. Stainless steel. And it went from nothing on the machine to full production in 22 minutes. Now, that's extraordinary. And because we can do that, we have customers that set the machine up every day. Every day they change. They might run 3,000 of this part, 5,000 of that part, 10,000 of this part. That's a game changer. So when you're up against other subcontractors who've all got Citizens and Stars and everybody's got their sliding head machines and they've all got the same sort of people and they pay them the same sort of money and they're all competing on the same playing field. And then you have someone who's got the balls to buy a multi-spindle who's got the get-go to say, I will spend that money. I will buy that machine. He is now taking a gun to a knife fight. He's completely able to disintegrate the opposition because he can be so much more competitive in the way that he's pricing those parts. And that's why multi-spindles sell. That's why Index have sold nearly 3,000 of them.
Wow, that's a great explanation. I mean, back to what you just said, though. I mean, how often do you... I run into all the time where, because I'm selling somebody's used Index, and often what they're saying is, oh my God, yes, this machine is amazing. Screw it. I'm getting 6 Tsugamis. If one Tsugami goes down, the rest of them are working.
I understand that, but I did a fantastic video on this. This was we did some objection videos because we get faced with this all the time. Why should I spend all this money on one Index machine when I can get 6 Citizen or Star machines for the same amount of money? And if one of them goes down, I've still got 5 producing.
Well, I'm glad that you got a good rebuttal to this because this is going to help me when I'm talking to somebody.
The rebuttal I use is imagine back in the early part of the 20th century, the salesman of the Bedford van, let's call it a Buick van or something like that, and he's knocking on the door of the procurement office at the post office, and he says to the old postman, the guy who's responsible for buying the trucks or the horse and carriage for postal delivery, he says to this guy, I've got this new thing. Instead of your 2 horsepowers that you've got on your wagon with your 2 horses, Fred and Ginger, I've got this new truck with 20 horsepower, and it can deliver all the post, and you don't have to worry about vet bills and shoeing, and it's faster and all the rest of it. And the old postman says, oh, yeah, but when one of my horses goes lame, I've still got the other one, and I can deliver product. But when your Bedford truck breaks down, I've got nothing. Mm-hmm. Well, that's exactly the wrong-headed thinking when it comes to multi-spindles. Space is limited, people are limited, power is limited, and if you can get the same output from less square meters off a single machine than you can off 6 machines and 3 or 4 operators to run them, you'd be mad to go down the route simply because you're worried that when it breaks down, you'd have nothing. These machines will run at 92, 94% uptime year in, year out. These are Index machines. They are beautifully crafted.
If they're semi-new.
Like all things, if you try and sell one that's 25 years old, it's more problematic. And you and I both know what that's like. But the reality is you're talking about machines that are 20 years old that have run 5, 6, 7,000 hours a year for 20 years, with the same spindles. It's an incredible thing.
Can you run an Index lights out?
You can if you know what you're doing. So you can have tool monitoring systems on there. It really does depend on the application and on the material. I mean, you wouldn't want to be running it in really nasty material because you have issues of tool life, and you don't have sister tooling. You don't have the ability of using sister tooling. So it'd have to be a pretty benign material and a pretty understandable process. But you could certainly get 4 or 5 hours extra out of a machine when you knock off on the date shift and the guy says, make another 300 and then turn yourself off, or make another 1,000 and turn yourself off. You can do that. And we do it all the time.
I mean, you must be pretty good at sales if you can go and tell somebody. What I've found, and I know I'm assuming it's the same with you, it's the hardest to sell a machine to somebody who's never had that kind of machine, particularly somebody who's never had a multi-spindle.
Well,
But yeah,
I'm not sure that's true, Noah. I think sometimes
because they go the sticker shock, it's like,
well,
whoa, $3 million. Like,
yeah,
I'm going to have
you're introducing the price too early in the conversation. If you're talking about price in the early stage, you've got no chance of getting to the later stage.
okay, this is interesting.
You don't want to be talking about that sort of thing. You want to be talking about cost of production. That's what's interesting. And I do think you have to speak to the right person. We've had tremendous success in the UK because we have found entrepreneurial owners of businesses. I think it's much easier to sell a machine like this to somebody who owns his own company, who has a small board of directors that can make top-down decisions quite quickly.
Oh, that's always the best, no matter what you're selling.
Yeah, even more so with this type of machine, because if you've got to go to a board of directors and it's got to get thrown across the Atlantic to be signed off by some faceless guy in Chicago, the likelihood is it's never going to happen. They just can't see the sense of the investment. But if you can find the right people and talk to the right people, and you don't go in about price straight away, you start talking about cost of production and how much it, just on tooling costs alone. I mean, the studies that we have done, because of the platform and the way that the tools are interfaced into the machine, we get 40, 50% better tool life on like-for-like cutting data. It's extraordinary. Because on a sliding head machine, in the main, you're holding it in a platen or a turret. You get micro vibrations and the tools wear out. So it's a completely different concept, but it's not something that you can sell in an afternoon from a brochure. You have to approach it completely differently.
For sure.
And what we try and argue is that it gives the customers the ability to win business that they otherwise couldn't win. And that's the appeal. I can now make margins that I can't make off my sliding heads, because on my sliding heads, I'm competing against everybody else who's got the same equipment. So I can differentiate myself in the market. I can sell for a lower price, but make a better margin. That's the rub.
I got you. I mean, how, for just ballpark figures, and I know it's different with you. I mean, my understanding, an MS 22 millimeter 8 spindle, I think in the United States, what is that, about $2.5 million?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on the
It's
US.
more money in the United States.
It is, and there's lots of reasons for that. There's duty, there's shipping, there's all sorts of other things that go into it. And I don't want to do a disservice to my colleagues and friends at Index Corporation by talking out of turn. But
okay, well, that's fine.
But yeah, I mean, they're definitely up there. They're
right, they're up there. So you have to have a part that you get a ton of money for. That's the issue.
Well, if you look at a part like this, you see that?
Cool. And describe it for the people listening.
Well, so this is a part, probably about 28 millimeters, so just over an inch in diameter. It's made out of a stainless steel. It's a very accurate part. It's actually a fluid tip, so through it gets past paint. It's used in a spraying application. So these holes here around the periphery, and then you've got a central hole through the middle. And the form on that central hole is extremely complex. Now, we have been making this part on Index machines for about 60 years. We started on Cam Autos. We went to Index GE, Index GS, Index G220, and now we've made the first one on a multi-spindle. Now, that part on a multi-spindle comes off in 20 seconds. On a GS30, it's probably 4.5 minutes. Now, that is game-changing. Now, I won't go into the numbers in terms of sales price and all the rest of it, but if you can imagine, let's say you have a part that takes 4.5 minutes on a twin spindle, twin turret, mill turn machine. In the US, such a machine would sell, let's say, for $500,000 US.
Yeah, three to 500.
$500,000 US for a machine that produces a part in 4 minutes. How much would you pay for a machine that could make that part in 20 seconds? You're 12 times quicker. So just the simple maths would say you could spend 6 million. Now, clearly, we're not 6 million. We're a lot less than that. And that's where it pays. The incremental increase in output is disproportionate to the incremental increase in price. And that's why it works.
Who do you most sell to? I mean, in England, I guess maybe the industries are a little different. Medical, aerospace, automotive. I mean, it really makes sense for automotive because there's You need to make so many parts.
Yeah, but we don't have much of an automotive industry in the UK anymore. I would say our biggest users are subcontractors, and the subcontractors themselves would be subcontractors into the hydraulics industry, could be the medical industry, could be aerospace, fasteners, things like that, things that are made in volume. But we are mostly successful selling into the subcontractors, the small owner-managed entrepreneurial company that can understand and get their head around the benefit, and where we don't need to convince a board of directors who, to be honest, aren't as close to the solution as the owner-manager guy would be.
You're basically not trying to compete with that. The Morrissey, the AG20 Schutas, like.
Yeah, I mean they have their place. There's no question they have their place, but they aren't the same performance that you can get from an index. Now, clearly, you have to have the right parts for an index. You're not going to make simple bushes with plus minus 0.3 thou or something of a tolerance. That's not what they're designed for. Simple brass parts or parts made out of EM1A, mild steel. That's not where it really scores.
What's the most popular model? 22 millimeter?
No, I would say
32, 40?
MS40 for us. So if you think about a 40 millimeter diameter, we still got 6,500 RPM on the spindle. We can go all the way down to 8 millimeters without too much problem. That's a huge range, and that covers the whole of your sliding head.
Oh, really? You can run 8 millimeters on a 40 pretty well?
You can. I mean, yeah. I mean, 6,000 RPM is decent if you're running stainless or something like that. It's probably better at 10 to 12 mil, but it would go down to 8 at a push for the right application. So it gives you a tremendous range. And the machine, the 40, is not that much more expensive than a 22. I mean, it's more expensive, clearly, but it's not double. But it's giving you double the capacity.
Are they going to they're now making a 24 millimeter now in Germany?
Yeah, they are. So the 22 is stopped. It's now called the 24/6, yeah. And you can have a 22/8 as an 8 spindle machine as well.
That's 22, but not 24.
Correct.
And then are they about to start making a 42 millimeter again? I feel like I heard
No,
that.
so the 40 is available in 6 spindle version or 8 spindle, and then they have the 52 mil as well.
You don't sell too many 52s, do you?
We have sold a few, but yeah, they are more expensive. And often when you get to 52 mil, you're looking at chuck parts and robots, and it's a bit more complicated. But we are quoting them, and I'm pretty confident we will sell one possibly this year.
All right. How are you? Yeah. How is this coming year looking for multi-spindles?
Well, I'm going to be honest, because I think it's always best to be honest on these sort of things. The market is definitely flatter than we would like. The UK had a very good time in 2022 and 2023 coming out of COVID. Yeah. I think now we've had our own elections in the UK that's caused quite a lot of disquiet and concern. We've got a new government that's come in with a massive majority, which means that they have the power to do almost anything they like. They've announced a budget that's coming out at the end of this month, October 30th, which we've been waiting for now for 4 months since they came to power, which is unheard of. And there are all sorts of rumors about how they're going to clobber companies on tax. Our national insurance contributions are going to go up. So there's a lot of companies, I think, nervous about what's happening, and that's caused people to just delay and wait to see what happens. So that's a big gripe I have.
So the same in the United States.
Yeah, and in the US, I know it's busy in the US. I saw you briefly in Chicago when I was over there, and I'm talking to my colleagues at Index and Hermley and others. The Index business, the US business is very strong. There's a lot going on in the US. But you too are going to have the headwinds of the election in November. Nobody knows which way that's going to go. Obviously, around the world, there's quite a lot of anxiety about that. And this just sucks confidence out of the market. It means that people who are sitting there, even though balance sheets might be strong and there might be some money in the coffers, people just say, I tell you what, we're going to wait. Let's wait and see.
Yeah, I know. I feel like that. And I feel like it doesn't even matter who wins. Most of the people in our business are, how shall we say, conservatives. But even if their candidate loses, I think they'll go, okay, now we can buy something. I mean, I'm hoping.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right.
Case.
I think once doubt and worry is replaced by certainty, whichever way that certainty is, it immediately has the effect of diminishing the amount of worry. At least you know what you're dealing with. Not knowing is the problem.
For sure. For sure. Just a couple other questions. What's something that you feel like you're really great at, that you just kick ass? You tell yourself in the morning you need to build yourself up.
Ah, I'm an Englishman. We don't like talking about that sort of thing, really. I don't know. I would like to think I inspire my team. I hope my team enjoy working with us. Sometimes it's tough, like in all businesses.
That's a great answer.
Well, I don't know if it's a great answer or not. They're probably listening to this podcast saying, "Well, a load of rubbish. The guy's a tyrant, or the guy's a twit, or whatever." I don't know, but I like to think the team are all on the same journey with me, and we work hard to look after them. And I think that's an important thing to do as an employer.
Yeah, no, it's great. Well, it's like I'm giving you a job interview here. What's something that in the coming year you're thinking, I really want to work on? I need to.
I mean, one of the things that we have done, which is a bit of a diversification away from the machine tool side, is we also got involved with selling metal 3D printing machines. And I know metal 3D printing.
Interesting.
I know you're interested in it, and a lot of people are. And we are working for another two German companies, one called SLM, who's quite well known on laser powder bed fusion, and the other is called Giefertech, which is a Berlin-based company who have developed a process called WAM, which is wire arc additive manufacturing, using welding coil for rapid deposition. And every person that we talked to said the same thing. Wow, I love this technology. It's so exciting. And, we're really interested. And then we tell them the price of the machine and they go, I don't think I'm ready to spend that. But would you mind printing a part for me? So we thought about it and we decided we would monetize that process. So we set up a new company. I'm wearing the shirt, Additive it's called. Mm-hmm. And it's based in Preston in the northwest of England. And we employed a very, very capable guy to run it, a chap by the name of Ian Brooks, who came out of Renishaw. So Renishaw have developed their own 3D printing machines. And he came out of Renishaw. And we built a team around him. And we started off by buying some machines. So we bought a couple of SLM machines, a couple of Giefertech machines, and put them in a factory. And we printed parts for customers.
And so you're in the production business now?
We are in the production business, yeah. So we're a subcontractor selling capacity on 3D printing. But it's also helped us take those customers on their 3D printing journey, understand what's required, understand the health and safety implications, how to work a part through, how to understand whether it makes sense to print it or not to print it. So because we're on that journey with them, we have then found that we've shifted the dial on machine sales. So now we've started selling machines on the back of that refined way of working with the customer base. Now that's pretty much in its infancy. That company is only 2 or 3 years old. And so in 2025, we're looking to boost that forward again. So that's a big target for us next year.
So, okay. So you were trying to sell them 3D printers. They were nervous. You said, all right, we'll subcontract to you. And the idea was more by subcontracting to them, they'll get comfortable with the idea of 3D printing and then hopefully then buy some from you.
Yeah, it wasn't quite that cut and dry. That's the way it's worked out. So what we found was that everybody is hugely interested in 3D printing, but there's a whole thing of validation of a part. Is it structurally as sound as a forged part or a cast part or a part that's machined from bar or billet? How do you understand those vagaries? How do you understand the economics of it? How do you run such machines safely? Because powder can be a dangerous a dangerous material. You don't want to inhale it, so you've got to have the right health and safety procedures in place. So there are all sorts of things that senior management look at and go, I'm not too sure we're ready for that. And the price tag is eye-watering. These machines are not cheap. But
how much is it for one? What's the range?
Well, laser powder bed fusion machine, I can only talk UK prices. I'm not familiar with the US and all the rest of it. But, you're going to start at 300,000 or 400,000 sterling and go up to, $1 million for a standard machine. But they also do a 12 laser machine now, SLM, an incredible machine. But I think...
See, it seems like you would be the right people that would be cut out to sell a nice expensive machine. You're used to selling expensive machines.
Absolutely. We don't sell anything because it's cheaper. We only sell normally high-end products. And, our job is not, when we're looking to sell, our job is to try and understand pain, understand what it is that the customer is trying to achieve before we start selling product. And that's That's another Americanism. There's a great American school of training called Sandler. You may have heard of it.
I have heard of it.
Yeah, well, Sandler have got we employ a very good Sandler trainer to help our sales team understand the process of selling high cost capital equipment. And
you feel like the traditional British way of selling something is different than that?
Yeah, I think the machine tool way of selling is features and benefits driven. Look at my wonderful machine. Look how many tools. Look at the horsepower I've got on the spindle, and it's all rubbish.
Versus listening to the people.
Yeah, if all you're talking about is the features and benefits of your product and the fact you've got great service and all the rest of it, you're saying exactly the same as every other sales guy.
Yeah.
And what you're doing is you're forcing your prospect or your customer to make a decision based on the bottom line. There is nothing else that differentiates you.
Okay, and so with the Sandler, the system is to what? How can I solve your problem? Is that?
Well, yeah. Firstly, to understand the problem by asking good questions. And some people don't even know they've got a problem. They might not understand that they've got a problem. So it's understanding how to ask the right questions, and also being open and honest and saying, I don't think there's a problem that we can solve here.
Yeah.
And making sure that we then focus all our time on something that is convertible rather than chasing around on projects that we've got no chance of winning. So it's about using this rather than this.
That's interesting that you would point that out as something just different,
It's something that I have known and understood for many, many years, but not been able to articulate properly. And then I met this guy. I saw him on LinkedIn, actually. Talking, and I thought, blimey, he's talking a lot of sense. And we actually met in a pub in London. This is a funny anecdote I shall share with you. It's very brief. But we met in a pub in London, a pub that I've known for a long time. And Will and I were talking, and he said to me, "What's your strike rate? What's the strike rate when you quote to orders? What is it?" And I said, with great pride, on some of the machines that we sell, we're as good as 1 in 3.
Out of 3 people you quote machines to, you sell 1?
On some products. I said 1 in 3, 1 in 4. He said, well, let's take 1 in 4 because the maths is simple.
Sounds awesome to me.
Sounds awesome. That's what I thought. And he said, so let's take 1 in 4 because the maths is simple. What that means, Richard, is that 75% of your time is wasted. If you're only winning one...
I honestly happen to disagree with that. But
why do you disagree with that?
Just because you lose... one battle doesn't mean you haven't learned from it, doesn't mean it can't lead to something else in the future.
All of that I grant you. Of course, he was being a bit flippant, but the point that he's making is if you work harder at understanding where you can win and therefore take those projects to their fruition,
yes,
you have a much better chance of success. And although 1 in 4 is a pretty good return, he was making the flippant comment, okay, Richard, it's not bad, but it does mean that 75% of your efforts last year were wasted, in as much as they didn't give you the result in the year that you were looking for them. Now, there is some truth to that. It was a flippant answer, but it made me think. It made me think, how wise are we about how we're doing it and what we're doing it and when we decide to pull the trigger? And it's that wisdom, I think, that sets us apart. That's what we're trying to teach our people, and I think that's what sets us apart.
Is that kind of going to the whole 80-20 rule?
No, it's just saying we want to deal with people on an equal business standing. So we don't want to be treated as sniffy salesmen. If somebody asks us for our opinion, we'll give it to them. We'll try and understand their business. We'll work hard at understanding their business. And if we think we can help, we will. And if we don't, we will say we can't. And we want that sort of a relationship. We want to be the trusted advisor rather than the sniffy salesman who's trying to cold call and go around for a cup of tea and talk about this and all that nonsense. We don't want to be doing that.
Right. So he's saying that you need to be more selective in who you sell to.
No. We need to be more selective on who we think we can sell to. We need to work harder at calibrating the potential of any inquiry. And if we're not sure that we've calibrated it, we need to ask more questions. What we don't want to do is resort to... it's not an unusual thing for our sales guys to be approached or talk to a customer, and the customer says, look, I've already got 2 quotes in from DMG, Mori, and Mazak. If you want to be included, we need a 3rd quote. Well, in such a scenario, you really are wasting your time. If you put a quote in based on that, and let's say they've already got 5 DMGs, you are wasting your time. unless you can try and understand what is their relationship like with their incumbent supplier, how is it going, what problems have they had, what did those problems mean to the business. If you can do all of those things and come out of it saying, look, there is an appetite for change here, then it's something that we take seriously. But if you can't establish that, the likelihood is you're wasting your time.
I agree. But in a way, they've done you a favor by telling you that, because,
But if they don't tell you that, Noah, if you ask the questions, the guy says, sorry, that's not your business, we're not interested. You say, okay, well, we ain't either.
Oh, if you ask the question of, have you been pricing it with other builders?
Well, no, everybody will price with other builders, but it's how you do it. If the guy is simply saying to us, I'm not prepared to give you any more information, I want a 65 millimeter spindle machine, 2 spindles, 2 turrets, and a bar feed, and I want a price by Friday, and if you want to be included, you better deliver. That isn't an inquiry that we would get involved with. The likelihood is it's going to end in failure, and it's wasted everybody's time. And it's a hard message to convey.
Versus what would be something they'd say that you'd go, all right, this guy's for real.
If someone said that to us and said, we're interested in your solution, we'd say, can we come in and talk to you? Can we come and understand what it is that you're trying to do? What's driving the investment? Why do you need this machine? What are you trying to achieve with it? What are the problems that you're facing? And then once we understand all of that detail, we can then make a judgment. Actually, our index solution would be bang on for them. This really would help them. And now we can try and explain why we think our solution would help them. And that sort of self-discovery of them understanding their problem and defining their problem to us, and us learning through that intercourse, is the way that you become great at sales. Talking features and benefits and going through your CRM and talking to 200 people a day isn't the way to do it.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not going to say always, but often when people are really serious about something, they know more about it than I do. Yeah,
that's the other thing. They all do their research, don't they? They'll all have their opinions. They've all been on the internet. They all think they know the answer. Our job is to find out where we can win and to spend most of our time on projects where we can win them.
That makes 100% sense, because particularly with what you're selling, because so many people, they come to us and they see an index, they're running Acmes. And I've seen many shops that do run Acmes that then also buy indexes. There's a place. But sometimes people just go and they're like, yeah, I'm thinking about a year ahead. And I'm like, well, we sell used machines. Hopefully this will not be here a year ahead.
Yeah.
You can tell the difference between somebody who, usually the problem is, once in a while you have somebody who comes out and you go, there's no way this guy's real or woman's real, and then they are. And then once in a while, sometimes the people you think are the most serious are the ones that are, full of crap.
Yeah, that's why you have to ask the questions.
It sounds like you have a really good set of questions to ask, which I need to brush up on. One thing I try to ask everybody, I'm very into serendipity. So what's one thing in your life that you feel like it's just really serendipitous? It was important. Somebody you met, somebody
marrying my wife. Clearly,
yeah.
I'm blessed with a great wife and partner and mother to my children, and I'm very lucky that I met her when I did.
That makes total sense. I feel the same. That's just meeting her somehow, and just, do you have anything else to say to the people of the world?
Not really. I'm delighted if anybody's managed to get through a whole hour of this. They've got great patience. I thank everybody for their attention, and I wish everybody well. And we're coming up to Christmas. I daren't say it's only October, but the likelihood is I won't speak to many of you before then. So have a wonderful Christmas. Well, that's an awful thing. That's an awful thing to say on October 15th.
If people are interested in an index and they're in England or in the Middle East, where should they go?
Yeah, obviously talk to Kingsbury. You can find us on the internet, and if you want us to print some parts for you, we can sell that to anybody in the world. So anybody who's interested in 3D printing, give us a call.